The purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience
Hi,
decrees.
my name is Howard Thompson. I'm your host today on Freethought Forum. We're glad that you could join us this evening for a little bit of discussion about free thinking and history and ideas. For those of you who may not know, free thinking is a term first used by British author Anthony Collins in 1713. He wrote a book called Discourse of Free Thinking, and by free thinking he meant the right to inquire into any area of human knowledge, including religion, and the right to speak about what you found in your inquiry freely. So that's the essence of free thinking, with the emphasis on the examination of religion to distinguish free thinking from other liberal philosophies over the years. On today's show, our topic is Governor Bush, Jerry Falwell, and religious law. I had the privilege of going last Thursday, February 25th, to the Texas Senate State Affairs Committee hearing on Senate Bill 138. This is Texas's version of a Religious Freedom Restoration Act. There had been a National Religious Freedom Restoration Act, very simply worded, that was struck down a few years ago by a U.S. Supreme Court decision in the case of Bernie versus the Catholic Church in Bernie, Texas. The Catholic Church had not wanted to obey local laws that everyone else has to obey and asserted religious freedom and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the National Act, as their authorization and right to ignore local laws of Bernie, Texas. That case was argued before the Supreme Court. The Catholic Church lost, Bernie won, and the National Religious Freedom Restoration Act was struck down. Since that time, a number of states have worked to have their own Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, and the one that I want to hear discussed and testimony given on before the Texas Senate State Affairs Committee is Texas's version, Senate Bill 138. Now, the reason for the title I have is that there is a link between Governor Bush and Jerry Falwell in this act. Not that Jerry Falwell and our governor, who wants to be president, have colluded in any way, but they both very strongly support this bill. In Texas, this bill is sponsored in the Senate by Senator Sibley of Waco, Shapiro, the head of the State Affairs Committee, and your senator locally in San Antonio, Jeff Wentworth, is one of the co-sponsors. There is a House version of the bill, and your House representatives, Longoria and Alvarado, are on the House committee, which we'll hear this later, so that if you wanted to contact people locally who could have an effect, Representatives Longoria and Alvarado and Senator Wentworth can have an impact on this bill. I was surprised at the hearings to see the Rutherford Institute, which is a legal sort of ACLU extension of Jerry Falwell's Liberty University, show up to testify for the bill. The Rutherford Institute was invited by Senator Sibley, a Republican who is the sponsor of the bill and the author of the bill. So there's a direct connection between religious right legal organizations like the Rutherford Institute, Jerry Falwell's outfit, and the Liberty Legal Institute out of Plano, Texas. There's some key things that you need to know about this bill. One, it is a great attack on the separation of church and state, going well beyond any sort of idea of restoration of religious liberties. If the bill passes, religionists will become a privileged class that will be exempt from many laws of the state and be able to assert their religious beliefs upon other people, which makes it a threat to civil rights. Now, I've got a few slides here that I'm going to flip through as we talk to help us follow the story. The first thing I thought we should look at is the definition of the free exercise religion as it appears in the bill. Free exercise of religion is defined as an act or refusal to act that is substantially motivated by sincere religious belief. Well, for any of you who like precise use of language to understand what it means, and precise use of language is important in laws and understanding them and applying them, I think you can quickly note that there are some problems with this language. If you examine the bill, religion is undefined. So we don't know who would be affected by this bill. Traditionally in Texas, Texas officials, elected and appointed, have regarded belief in a supreme being as being religious as long as you exclude what one witness of Senator Sibley's called crazy religions. So obviously there are some religions that regard themselves as religions that might be excluded. Very clearly, people who don't have a belief in a supreme being or believe in multiple gods or lesser powers would not get the powers given to religion in this bill. So the big question is who gets these rights? And religion is not defined anywhere else in Texas law or anywhere else in federal law. Another problem is the use of the word sincere in front of religious beliefs. How do you determine when someone's belief is sincere? I don't think there's any legal standard for this that I heard anybody mention in the committee hearings or that I've been able to define. So we would have a question immediately, if any issue arose, as to who is sincere and who is not sincere in their religious beliefs. Religious beliefs is also vague and undefined, and we will talk about that more later, so that at the outset of this bill, the key definition of what this bill is trying to accomplish is inconsistent, and it is not really a legal standard, as we will see, but a personal standard. The next thing we need to look at is the definition of religious belief. And I will drive the cameraman and producer crazy here as I flip through these. The definition of religious belief in the bill is very broad. It's a central part or requirement of the larger system of a person's sincere religious belief, or any other part of the larger system of a person's sincere religious belief. Well, I think anybody who has spent any time thinking about religious beliefs understands that there's a lot of disagreement about what the beliefs are of denominations or churches or even broad religions. You will note that this language does not limit, however, the beliefs of a denomination to any sort of written tenets or doctrines. It can be anything that a person thinks is a religious belief and that they link their actions and decisions to. This makes it a personal standard that the law is trying to institute, because it is what a person believes about their religion that this law is not trying to defend, not some generic right to worship or some key tenets or values of a religious belief system, but anything that might be part of a religious belief system. This makes it a personal standard and not a legal standard. And anytime you start trying to legislate personal standards, you're going to have problems, because later on this is going to be settled by courts and juries with judges ruling, and you're going to have in that case a large entanglement between state and church, because a judge and jury are going to have to decide yea or nay about what is or is not a religion, yea or nay about what is not a religious belief, and yea or nay about whether or not a person is sincere in the religious belief that they are trying to assert under this law. The other problem with the bill is that it sets very vague standards for government and how government is supposed to treat religions. The key is the compelling interest standard. Government is supposed to have a compelling interest before it substantially burdens the free exercise of a sincere religious belief. When I was at the hearings at the State Affairs Committee, I heard a number of lawyers opposed get up and disagree with the bill's sponsor, Senator Sibley, and his representatives from religious right legal groups about compelling interest being very clearly defined. One lawyer got up and said he had done a search in case law and found no consistent standard of what was meant by compelling interest. So right off the bat, government's going to have a problem. They will not be able to know which of their thousands of mandated authorities are compelling interests versus the sincere exercise of a religious belief and what is not. Substantial burden on religion is also undefined. And this almost gets back to a personal belief and interest sort of thing. Substantial burden will probably become how upset a religious person is that they cannot exercise what they hold to believe to be a sincere religious belief. A personal standard like this is impossible for a government to administer. It depends upon the strength of the belief and the government understanding and knowing all of the thousands and tens of thousands of conflicting religious beliefs among just for example, more than 20,000 identifiable different Christian denominations. The law also requires that government burden religion when it has to burden religion in the least restrictive manner. Again, least restrictive is not a standard that has been applied in the law before, and government has no way of knowing how far it will be pushed in this least restrictive standard. Now, there is some loopholes type of language for government in the law that seems to give them some wiggle room on least restrictive that would save them from later lawsuits. But again, this is not a clearly defined standard. This is a vague standard that will be difficult for government to administer. The bottom line is that government can't know in advance when it has a compelling interest that it can justifiably burden religious belief with. This effectively destroys equality under the law. Government will have to treat each and every person differently instead of all people being equal under the law. And that pretty much destroys one of the bedrocks of our free democracy, which is the law applies equally to all persons. And that's the essence of what the religious right wants out of this law. They don't want to be treated equal. They want to be exempt from government control, and they want privileges and powers that other people don't have. There's another extraordinary aspect of this bill that is extremely unusual for anyone who follows government allowing itself to be sued. There are provisions in this bill that waive the government's right not to be sued and their right not to have damages assessed against them. This is highly unusual. I'm unaware of any other group in terms of civil rights or any other concern of people against the state where the government automatically up front waives its right to sue. This empowers religion greatly to sue government when religionists believe that their rights have been infringed. And since there are numerous well-funded religious right legal groups and lawyers out there, there are people who will know what this means and will be able to use it as a club against government. Now, the bill calls for a number of things that can be gained against them in a lawsuit, which I'll go over real briefly. The first is declaratory relief, which means there can be court orders against government causing them to cease and desist. There's injunctive relief, which is a restraining order on future government action. They can get damages. That's limited to $1,000 per person, but there was discussion in the testimony I heard with regard to, okay, it's limited to $1,000 per person, but what if a congregation of 5,000 sues the city over something individually? Is it $1,000 times 5,000 or a $5 million bill for government if they lose? Attorney's fees are allowed, which ensures that the attorneys are going to get paid, and of course all the expenses and court costs are allowed. This is sort of an unusual dream law for lawyers, because people who are going to be upset about some of their most private beliefs that they share personally are going to be empowered to go to a lawyer who knows that he can get money out of government for his expenses if he wins. This will generate a lot of lawsuits. It's very unusual, I think, for a government of all the people to give a select group of people a power over government that is denied everyone else. And while I know that there are many religionists out there who believe that their religion should be over government, in fact, in this country we do have a secular government, and religion is not over government. Our government is to deal equally with all citizens. There's also another provision buried in this bill which will affect all individual Texans and all businesses directly. And let me read this provision. This is in a section of the bill called the defense. Essentially what it says is that a religionist may assert that that's violation of their religious beliefs, as a defense in a judicial or administrative proceeding without regard to whether the proceeding is brought in the name of the state or any other person. Now, let me bring your attention to the last phrase of that. That last phrase, any other person, extends the impact of this law beyond the relationship between government activities and religion. This extends it to all individuals and businesses in any other legal entity that is thought of as a person, a partnership, or anything of that nature. What this means is that if you have a lawsuit against a religious person for something they did or failed to do with regard to you, and they can assert a sincere religious belief, and since they're the one who holds the belief, their declaration of sincerity is going to be hard to challenge. They assert a sincere religious belief as their defense in the lawsuit with you. The provisions of this bill are going to apply to that lawsuit. I don't see any other way that you can read the meaning of the phrase any other person at the end of this section other than how I'm describing it. What that means is that if you are a couple and you're not married and you want to rent an apartment, and the owners of the apartments decide that because of their religious beliefs they don't want people living in sin, so they're not going to rent to you, they can assert their religious belief that people should not live in sin and cohabit against you and deny your rental. I hear some of you out there already thinking right now, oh, wait a minute, there are federal civil rights laws that prohibit this. You're absolutely right. There are federal civil rights laws that prohibit this. But what this law does in Texas is give cover to religionists in Texas who want to violate your civil rights based on their religious beliefs. This sort of case would probably go to a state court first, and they would have the defense of the state law first, and you would have the burden of having to have the money and the time and the effort to challenge them and have the state law struck down. So this puts people who don't have a lot of money or don't have a lot of time at a disadvantage in dealing with religionists who want to assert their religious beliefs against you. This pretty much weakens civil rights in Texas, and I think that's something that should be of concern to all of us, because one of the things that we look to in our national laws of a secular government, where we expect everybody to be treated equally before the law, is for minorities to be protected. In Texas, we live in a state where there is a large majority of Christians, many of them very militant, many of them very hostile to other groups. And the minorities whom various Christian groups in this state don't like are going to be put at a sincere disadvantage when this law goes through. And I predict it will go through. Governor Bush will be signing it within months. Let's move on to another topic. Some general effects on Texans. Another aspect of this bill that is bothersome is it makes no mention of non-religious Texans. The matters of conscience and beliefs of conscience of non-religious Texans are not recognized. They do not get the privileges given to religionists in this bill. Automatically, this sets up a discrimination effect between those who have religion and those who don't have religion. In fact, the provisions of this bill provide a positive incentive for people to be religious. Because if you don't want to be a second-class citizen, if you want the special treatments and privileges and powers that this bill is going to give you, then you'd better go out and start believing more and believing more strongly, because the strength of your belief and the number of your beliefs is going to determine how much privilege you get in a society governed by this bill. Effectively, this bill will institute, as the years go by in Texas, if it remains unchallenged and stands as intended by the religious right who wants it passed, it will set up in Texas a religious class system where the more religious people have greater privileges and powers than the less religious people, and the non-religious people are on the bottom of the heap as second-class citizens, subject to discriminatory acts and prejudice and bigotry at the hands of those who have religion. As I mentioned before, judges and juries are going to decide these disputes. And in Texas, in many areas, if not most areas, conservative Christians dominate the population and will dominate the jury pools. So the judges, who will be mostly Christian, and the juries, who will be mostly Christian, will interpret what is a religion, what is a religious belief, and the sincerity of religious belief in light of their Christian belief. This is a license to assert, as part of the legal system, religious belief against others, and again entangles state and church very deeply in the impact it is going to have upon you and all other Texans. It really sort of boggles the mind when you think about it, that we have before the legislature a law that was not even covered by the news media. There were no reporters there that I saw, and I saw no mention of the hearings that were held in the news. A law that can have vast impacts and will change our society immensely, sliding on through the legislature right on to the governor's desk for signature, and we hardly know about it. The impact on you is hardly discussed, and the religionists, primarily conservative Christians, who want it are just tickled pink that it's going through, and they're going to get their big club against government and everybody else. They're going to get exempt from laws, and they're going to get to assert their religious beliefs against government and everyone else. You would think that something that had this broad an effect on our state and our society would at a minimum require an amendment to our Constitution, which would require a higher standard of vote and an exposure to the public for passage. Yet it's in the Senate and the House as just a simple bill that will need a simple majority and the signature of a governor who is not going to do anything to upset the religious right because he wants their support so he can ensure himself nomination for the office of president in the Republican Party. Now, the religious right has talked about this bill some, and they have a propaganda line about this bill explaining away all of your worries. And if you believe their explanation, I guess you're more gullible than anyone watching a Freethinker show should have a right to expect. Their primary argument is that religion is now unfairly burdened in this country. What they're saying is that there has been a reduction of religious freedoms over the years to where religion has been constrained. And in a sense, perhaps they're right. In a sense, they no longer have the right as Christian KKK men to go out and beat and burn and kill people in the name of God, which they used to do without fear of prosecution in almost all cases. They've lost the right to have blasphemy be a crime and have people arrested and convicted and jailed for blasphemy. Certainly, religion has lost the right to have non-religious people barred from public office, which used to be Texas law and the law in many states. Yes, religion has lost some of its powers, but religion has lost few of its freedoms. And a distinction here needs to be made between individual exercise of religious rituals as a matter of conscience and group and institutional religion. Those who most strongly want this bill are organized religious groups, not individuals. I'm an atheist, and I would support a bill in the Texas legislature which defended religious and non-religious practices of conscience at an individual level. I think that's religious freedom. It's your individual ability and liberty to practice your beliefs as a matter of conscience. It's not the right of a large religious church to ignore the zoning and health and safety and education laws of the state. It's not the right of a religionist to deny rentals to people, to refuse to hire people, to not promote people, and to fire people from a job based on their religious beliefs. It's not the right of a religionist to refuse service at a lunch counter to someone who is a sinner according to their religion. Those are not freedoms. That stands the word freedom on its head and spins it around like 1984 doublethink, if you'll remember George Orwell's novel. This is not about religious freedom. This is about religious powers and privileges. And the fact that there are many conservative Christians who think that their Christian beliefs should be so empowered and should be above the law, and that God's law, as some of them will talk about, should stand above the Constitution. The fact that they believe this doesn't mean that it is right, or it is just, or it is suitable in a democracy of free individuals as we are. We're getting close to the end, and I'd like to wrap up and mention a few other things. I'd mentioned Senators Wentworth and Representatives Longoria and Alvarado as on the committees where this bill is currently being processed that you can contact locally here in San Antonio. It's very easy to go to the phone book and get their phone numbers and make a call and find out about this. I would suggest that you get online if you have a computer and get a copy of the bill so that you can read it for yourself and get the substitute Senate bill, not the original one, because the language has changed a little bit. And you should, for yourself, figure out and make your own choices about this. But I would urge you not to believe everything I say necessarily, because I'm certainly not infallible in my sources of information and in my interpretation, and don't believe everything religionists tell you. I would urge you to go out there and make up your own mind. Because that's the essence of what free thinking is all about. Free thinking is thinking for yourself and not necessarily taking someone else's word for it. Free thinking is going out for the evidence, finding the best evidence you can, understanding that evidence and the meaning of that evidence, figuring out its logical relationship to other pieces, and coming up with your own ideas. Free thinking really means having a free mind. And that's what this show is all about. Now, you'll have noticed in the background we have some information on the board here that has a telephone number that you can contact locally and find out information about the Freethinker Association of Central Texas and the Texas Hill Country Freethinkers that are in this area. And today I've also put my email address on there for those of you who have a computer and would like to contact me directly, so that you can get some information about local free thought and atheist activities, because there are groups locally that are doing things. But if nothing else, I'd like you to go away from today's show with the idea that free thinking applies in your everyday life, even at the mundane level of boring things like legislation in the Texas legislature that is going to affect your life greatly. I've enjoyed being here with you today, and I hope to come back later on. We thank you from Freethought Forum and hope to see you again next Thursday at 6:30. Howard Thompson signing off.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei, no person can deny. Die Gedanken